All right. Welcome everyone to CDX July webinar on your first climate target. I am Ping Manongdo, Head of Partnerships at CDX, and I am delighted to be hosting you today. And just before we go deeper into today's session, I would also like to acknowledge CDX CEO Mark Pfister, who is joining us as I am delivering the webinar under a stormy weather in Baguio City. Mark has very kindly supported us today in case I suddenly get disconnected. So thank you so much, Mark. Let's start with a few housekeeping reminders. We will endeavor to keep to time. Please drop your questions in the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer them within the session. A recording of this webinar will be made available via the CDX YouTube channel and LinkedIn page, so please follow us for updates. As part of the CDX Academy, we're running monthly 45-minute learning sessions that feature industry voices on key decarbonization topics. So do engage with us via the CDX Academy, LinkedIn, and the CDX newsletter for pragmatic insights and relevant connections to advance corporate decarbonization in Southeast Asia. Today's webinar focuses on practical pathways to setting your first emissions reduction target. Participants will explore sectoral benchmarks, estimation tools, and free frameworks that will make it possible for you to take credible action with the resources that you already have. Whether you're an SME or a corporate newcomer, this session offers a credible and accessible starting point for structured climate action grounded in tools, not perfection. So with that, I am now very delighted to introduce the first of three speakers joining us today. As Head of Sustainability and Safety at Frasers Property Singapore, our first speaker spearheads the company's transition to a net zero carbon, including the development of a comprehensive net zero carbon roadmap and climate risk assessment, while making significant improvements to its Green Mark certification and innovative green lease implementation. To tell us more about this journey, please join me in welcoming Yanchun Q. Q, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Ping, and good morning, everyone. I'm Q, Head of Sustainability and Safety at Frasers Property Singapore, and a board member of the Singapore Green Building Council. It's a great honor to be invited by CDX to share our sustainability journey, starting with what we have. So, before we begin sharing, we would like to share some rationale behind our climate target setting. So we began setting our climate targets in 2021, and we are a real estate company under Frasers Property Limited. Our portfolio comprises retail, commercial, as well as development projects. Given our business composition in the real estate industry, our carbon footprint of Scope 3 emissions actually accounts for approximately 78% of the total emissions, with the balance being Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And the other scenario behind this includes the growing awareness of the climate change and its impact on business, evolving climate regulatory related requirements and policies, growing demands from stakeholders' expectations for environmental responsibility and transparency, and of course, the last one is the internal alignment on our various departments and strategic integrations into business operations to ensure a unified approach. Okay, before setting these climate targets, it's also important to lay a solid foundations. We have established 4 pillars before setting the climate targets. So the more important one are, first, the robust governance structures and a centralized data management system. With a clear governance structures outlining the role, responsibility, and decision-making process, and also a centralized data management system housing all the relevant data, we can confidently proceed to set these climate targets. But without these foundations, the journey will just be challenging and also time-consuming. So another important consideration is that our climate targets is also reference to Singapore Green Plan 2030 and also net zero carbon to demonstrate alignment with a national objective. This ensures consistency in climate actions and compliance with regulations. Setting a climate targets that's not specific or misaligned with Singapore sustainability goal would be just counterproductive, as it will not contribute to the country's overall efforts to reduce emissions and may undermine this credibility. So by setting a realistic and aligned targets, we can support Singapore sustainability, meet the stakeholder expectation, and also at the same time enhance our reputations. We engage PwC as a consultant to facilitate and guide us in establishing the climate targets and roadmap. The process which basically consists of 3 stages. The first stage is the consolidating the emissions data across scope 1, 2, and 15 categories of the scope 3. For us, we do not need to have, it depends on the business, but we do not need to put in all the data for the 15 categories. It's not only those relevant categories that we need to do aligning to our business. The second one will be analyzing and updating our business as usual projections and SBTi pathway. And the third will be to review and finalize strategies and targets. So along the way, we also conducted the workshops to align stakeholders from various departments, including finance, HR, leasing, marketing, operations. So these workshops help identify key areas for actions. Engaging stakeholders is also very crucial to ensure that all relevant parties are informed, involved, and also committed to the climate targets and the strategies. A cost-benefit analysis of these strategies was also conducted. The outcome was a science-based targets, climate targets aligned with SBTi requirements, and a detailed roadmap outlining the strategies, actions, and to achieve our climate goals. To determine the percentage reductions targets for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, we utilize various references, benchmark, and tools. This includes the GHG inventory model, SBTi, the approaches, and also Singapore's decarbonization policies. We strategize and prioritize the sustainability initiative into phases. We first implement the low-hanging fruit first, and then followed by the medium capex, and then high capex initiative. Implementation of the sustainable initiative varies according to the sustainability maturity and the stakeholders involved in the buildings. Okay, now that we have set our climate targets, the next step is to formalize our commitment to SBTi. First, we will need to submit to SBTi to express our company's intention to set science-based targets. Next is the validation process. This process will take some time from our experience. We will submit the developed targets to SBTi, then schedule the date for validations. When we submit up and the schedule date, last time what we took is about 6 months. SBTi will review and then validate our targets to ensure that they are science-based. So this process will take about 2 to 3 months. Once validated, we will then publicly announce our targets and track our progress. But that is not the end, because we also need to publicly disclose our progress, and will regularly review and update our progress targets to align with the climate science. So along the way, we also strengthen our embodied carbon measurements using the building embodied carbon calculators and MECC from Singapore Green Building Council. These are publicly available for use. And also along the way, there will be some initiative. The Goal 25 initiative launched by Singapore Green Building Council and MSC encourages the building owners to set their indoor air temperatures to 25 degrees Celsius. So this is a very low-hanging fruit and will directly reduce our scope 2 carbons as well as scope 3 carbons if the tenants are agreeable to implement as well. So we take a very collaborative and integrated approach to sustainability, engaging the stakeholders to set climate targets and embedding the sustainability across our entire real estate life cycle. This enables us to minimize our environmental footprint, drive innovations, and deliver long-term value. Before ending, I would like to just share some of the challenges on setting the climate targets and also the sustainability journey. So our journey is not without any challenges. Some of the challenges we face is the first, tackling the indirect carbon emissions, which is the scope 3 emissions, including factors such as tenants, consumptions, embodied carbons, and also supply chain emissions, which pose a significant challenge. So addressing these emissions requires collaborative efforts and innovative solutions. The second one is leaders, approval, and stakeholders alignment. These is actually important success factors. Setting, implementing, and monitoring SBTI is not a small task, so we will need to address at the core of our strategies in order to ensure that these plans are realized and the key business functions to support them. So in view of time, I will not go through the remaining, but thank you everyone for the times.
Thanks so much, Q, for sharing how Fraser's Property Singapore charted its decarbonization journey. We'll ask you more questions about this during the panel discussion. But for now, please allow me to introduce our next speaker. He is a principal technical consultant, sustainability and climate change at ERM Thailand. He is an expert in GHG inventory, scope 1, 2, and 3, and climate change related issues, including all topics covered under global climate related disclosure standards, the alphabet soup of letters, TCFD, IFRS S2, CDP, and indices like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And he has been working in energy, power utilities, manufacturing, real estate, telecommunications, and finance sectors for the past 14 years. Please welcome Tirapon Premchit. Tirapon, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. So I think continuing on the theme presented previously, so I think if we go back to square one, and as you've mentioned, I have 14 years experience in this area, and I have specialized especially around greenhouse gas tools since the first year that I started as a consultant. So I truly understand the struggles that you would encounter in the first year, especially for industries that are more complex. But in general, a good place to start is a materiality assessment, and I've done already a quick assessment here. So in general, so I won't go into the details of scope 1, 2, and 3, but in general, scope 1 are the direct emissions that you're directly responsible for. Scope 2 is the electricity that you have purchased, and then there are also scope 3 activities that, as Q mentioned, are challenging to calculate. Typically, for most companies, fuel consumption and electricity consumption will become a large portion of your emissions. Therefore, if you look at these list of activities, so this is a generic list, but the other activities such as fugitive process, water treatment, and on-site waste management, these are also relevant scope 1 activities, but if you are not able to tackle these in your first year of inventory, we do recommend you to start with fuel consumption, electricity consumption as well, and over time expand to cover more scope 1 activities. And then, as mentioned by Q, scope 3 is very challenging, and then expand to look at the material issues there. So the steps that you could do is in terms of reviewing your spending, reviewing your activities, your fiscal activities, and seeing where you think that the most relevant source of greenhouse gas emissions are. You could also look at peer sustainability reports, so other companies in the same area, to see where the relevant sources of emissions are. And those will also help you to list the list of greenhouse gas activities that are relevant to you. Then, as I mentioned already, if you look at this list and you aren't able to cover all of the activities, you should at least cover the two most material activities, which would be fuel and electricity consumption. And value chain activities, then you could start to look in terms of the requirements for data collection for all of these activities and start to plan in terms of the next year's data collections. In terms of tools, so I myself as a consultant, so I have supported large corporates as well, oil and gas companies in Thailand, for example, power companies, as mentioned by Ping. in terms of calculating their greenhouse gas emissions. So sectors such as oil and gas have very complex sources of emissions and very varied sources of emissions. But in general, for most sectors, as shown in the previous slide, most of the greenhouse gas emissions will come from energy and electricity consumption. And the general formula is pretty simple, actually. You just need to know how much energy you've consumed, and that is multiplied by an emission factor. So an emission factor is basically a conversion factor. And for those starting out, this can be a challenge because there are many different sources of emission factors. So what then is a tool? A tool is basically either an Excel file. So actually within your own organization, you could create your own tools. And it would really be called a tool if you're able to reuse that Excel file year by year. But if you're not sure where to start, that's where I will go through some one example today. So the main important part of the tool is that it's reusable and it's also transparent. So as mentioned previously, you will need this tool to track your targets and your progress over time. And it needs to be transparent so that internally you can track how it's calculated, and then also prepare for third-party verification, which is becoming a trending requirement in this region in the future. There are two examples of tools that I provide here, but this is by no means complete. The first is Greenhouse Gas Protocol. They provide a set of Excel-based tools for different sources of emissions. As mentioned in the previous slide, you can look at what your peers are reporting, and then from there you can understand what are the relevant sources for you. Another tool that this is more Thailand specific here, but I think it really helps to show the flow and what these tools look like. It's an online tool, and organizations in Thailand, unfortunately, it is in the Thai language, but for those of you who are in Thailand, this is also usable, and this will be the example that I will provide today. The first part will be in terms of data collection and entry. So when you're presented with the tool, you'll see that there are various data requirements. And for this example, this is around energy consumption. So basically, you can look through that list. You can prepare an internal list of required data, engage with your different functions internally, and then start to fill that tool out. There are three main parts that are needed to be filled out here, which is the quantity of energy, the units of that energy consumption, and then finally, the evidence, which I will go into more detail in the next slide. So why is that evidence important? So that was from the company's point of view. The next step is the third-party verifier, or if you're still conducting an internal verification, that could be an internal verifier. So the third-party verifier will look at the evidence that you've uploaded. So it could be, for example, a bill or evidence of your energy consumption. They will match that with the number that you provided. And then they will also look at the source of the emission factor, which in this case is IPCC, which I will mention a little bit later on as well. So I think these are the three main things that the verifier will look at, is the quantity sort of matching with the scale of your operations, and where is your emission factor sourced from. So even if you don't use these pre-built tools, you can make your own tools yourself, so long as it's traceable in terms of the units of the consumption. It's traceable back to your original documentation in your organization, and then also the emission factors are traceable. Then the last step is certification, which is optional. There are different certifications in different jurisdictions, but within Thailand itself, there is what's called a carbon footprint for organization certificate, and it uses this tool that I've just explained, and it uses the two processes that I mentioned. The company enters the data, a third party reviews and verifies the data, then the TGO has another review, and verifies the total amount of the emissions and provides a certificate for your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions that are reported inside of the tool. So in terms of the key takeaways, really, in the first years, it can be a struggle. You should focus firstly on the largest source of emissions. And if you do have time in preparation for any regulatory or stakeholder requirements, you could phase it out in a few years. But otherwise, if it's you have more of a time crunch, then that could be more challenging, and you could maybe, for example, consider to use external consultants to help speed up the process. tools will really help to simplify the calculation so you don't have to worry about sourcing emission factors. There are a wide variety of available tools. And if you want to do it yourself, there are also IPCC guidelines where you can look at the calculation methodologies and do the calculations yourself. So thank you.
Thanks, Tirapon. From your sharing, I would like to recap the importance of starting with data, using tools as simple as an Excel sheet or those publicly available as developed by organizations like the JHD protocol, as long as that tool is something reusable and that tool offers transparent data to track progress over time and to be prepared for third-party verification, which is becoming a focus in Southeast Asia. So I'll come back to you with some questions during the panel discussion. But at this point, I'd like to introduce our last but definitely not least of our speakers who is the founder and CEO of Reset Carbon, which focuses on developing and implementing commercially available and commercially driven low carbon and other environmental management programs for Asian and international corporate clients. Previously, he was the director of WWF International Asia Pacific Climate Program, where he built and managed the Pan-Asian team. At WWF, he also co-led the design and setup of the Gold Standard Foundation, which is now a leading certification system for project-level carbon offsets and other environmental and social attributes. Please welcome Liam Salter. Liam.
Thanks, Ping. So what I'm being asked to talk about today is really how we move on from the inventory piece that Tirapon talked about and set a target. I think coming back to a couple of Tirapon's remarks, which I think are really useful, moving into this whole project, a level of ambition that your company can handle is really important. So you know, the best carbon target to start off with is a carbon target that your company is serious about. The absolute thing to avoid is a carbon target that you have felt pressured to set, but really don't have the capability to then execute. Because all that's going to happen is that you're going to sort of visibly fail to hit that target, and that's going to raise a whole other set of questions about the business that probably aren't worth, that you don't want to answer. So I think, first of all, we've got to keep this whole exercise within the bounds of your business ambition. And the way that we do that is really take the base data set that Tirapon talked about and model it to assess how much your emissions are going to grow and how much you can reduce them by, and use that model to then set a carbon target. Most of these models can be developed in-house. A lot of the time, we are doing this on spreadsheets with clients because the sort of off-the-shelf software available is generally not nuanced enough and sophisticated enough at this point in time to help evaluate all of the different reduction options available to different companies. So we recommend you probably can do this, you know, on a spreadsheet. If you're less ambitious and you have less emissions in scope, you can probably even do it in-house. So a couple of things here. We've got a sort of a specimen model here that I'll talk through, and then I'll show you a case study. But really, we want to end up in a situation where we have a model like this that we can talk through with C-suite, that C-suite then understands the implications for the business and can sign off on. That's where we want to be. Now, I know we've got a set of standards like SBTI and so on that sort of prescribe levels of ambition. There's two levels of ambition that are really important to look at: how deep a carbon target you're going to set and what emissions that you're going to cover. So SBTI, for example, will pretty much, if you want SBTI validation, you'll have to do sort of 40 to 50% scope 1 and 2 emissions reductions, and 25 to 45% scope 3 emissions reductions to get that validation. Whilst SBTI is a useful reference point, and if you can get there, that's great. Don't say you can get there if you really can't. And don't set an SBTI would be our advice if you really don't think you can get there, just so that you can say that you've got an SBTI, because the next 5 years of your life are going to be you showing how you're failing to meet something that you committed to. There's quite a large number of companies in the market that have actually done that, made that mistake. What we've found in our Asian client base is our Asian companies tend to be much more circumspect about setting an SBTI, and generally don't release an SBTI until C-suite has signed off on a model like this one. So that's kind of one thing we really recommend in order to sort of stay out of trouble. How do we build a model like this? Okay, there's a few just sort of key ingredients really. First of all, you can see on the x-axis it's just a time series to your target date from your base year. On the y-axis is your absolute emissions. We should try to understand business growth. Most companies' emissions in Asia are growing. We need to make an estimate of that because you're not reducing emissions from your base year, you're actually reducing emissions from where they will be in your target year, and you need to factor that growth in, and fast growing companies have a significantly greater challenge than slow growing companies. Then what you see is you're really building a series of wedges down to an ambition level. And that ambition level could be SBTI, could be a number that you pick based upon affordability. That's something to decide, but it's a function of the reduction opportunities that you're prepared to invest in and implement. And so really then what you're trying to do is build a stack of, you need to sort of size and build a stack of reduction opportunities and sort of see what levels of target you can achieve as a result of implementing those reduction opportunities, and then derive your target from that. That's absolutely something we would recommend. Next slide, I'm just going to show you a case study. So this is Swire Coca-Cola. What's interesting about Swire, it's a long-term client of ours, they have really good reporting, very granular. So you can go into their website and look back over the last couple of years, and it's actually pretty interesting. So you'll find, I think, a lot of interesting information there about how businesses plan and execute their programs. But I wanted to show you just really the sort of scenarios that they developed as an illustration. So really what they did here was exactly what we sort of talked about. They projected business growth. They've got some substantial business growth, actually probably was higher than in the model. But anyway, this is the original plan from a 2018 base year to a 2030 target. And then what they've done is they've sized their major reduction opportunities. And they've gone to their senior management and said, can we do this? And senior management's gone, yes, we think we can do this, or at least we can try to do this. And if we fail, it probably won't be our fault. We'll take that risk on. So let's put this in our plan. And what that commits them to, this is a scope 1, 2, 3 bundled inventory versus SBTI. So it's quite ambitious, but you can see if you look at the different wedges, you've got recycled primary packaging content and you've got primary packaging post-consumer recovery. So they have a big packaging footprint. So a lot of their challenges around recycled content and improved packaging, especially on PET, especially on cans. And so a big part of their strategy is about their ability to drive much deeper levels of recycled content into that. That's a set of sub KPIs that they now have to go and execute to hit their carbon target that they are comfortable with. The light green wedge is renewable energy consumption from bottling. So they have a big manufacturing portfolio. They're going 100% renewables. And again, they have a sub program now to drive that wedge that they are confident they can hit through on-site solar and off-site PPAs and other devices in the markets that they manufacture. The yellow wedge is energy efficient CDE. So this is the little fridges that you see in retail outlets are often owned by the bottler, the Coke branded fridges. They're often assets that are actually owned by the bottler, and they're getting much more efficient and have much fewer sort of refrigerants in them and so on. So there's a big reduction opportunity associated with renewing that fleet of refrigerators. And then the last piece is supply chain. So go and engage your suppliers to provide you with lower impact packaging and ingredients. And so they've stacked all of that together. They've said, okay, this gets us to SBTI level. That means we can confidently go and commit to SBTI, but only because we're confident that this roadmap can be delivered and we've got senior management sign off. And so I think that's really then, now we're really just tracking against that. And again, to Tirapon's point, updating the inventory on an annual basis against this roadmap to see if we need to adjust it. But this is really, I think, the basis for a solid carbon target. It doesn't have to be this ambitious. You can do scope 1 and 2. You don't have to do SBTI. You don't even have to do your whole business if you want to grow into this gradually. It's up to each business to sort of figure out how ambitious to be based upon the value proposition. But don't feel pressured by something like SBTI. The worst thing you can do is take on something that in the end you don't achieve. Thanks.
Wow, thanks, Liam. I was going to say that that really is a practical advice that is actually not heard of as often, at least in my perspective of observing it from the outside. Because you just said what companies are actually undergoing is a lot of pressure to sort of align and also to sort of join the bandwagon. And from what you said, it cannot just be a bandwagon exercise. So that's a very great segue to our Q&A portion. And I would like to engage with our participants to do drop your questions in the Q&A box if you have any questions for Tirapon, Q, and Liam during the session. So first question for all three of you, and you sort of alluded to this already, Liam, is that how ambitious should a first target be if the baseline for companies is still evolving? You sort of said, Liam, that this should be within the bounds of the business ambition. Could you expand a little bit more on that? And then I'll hear from Q and Tirapon, please. Thank you.
I think, we know that emissions are not reducing as fast as we need them to, right? So we know we need to be ambitious on the one hand. On the other hand, we know that if we set ourselves targets that we cannot achieve, that doesn't frankly help us reduce emissions a great deal either. So there's really a balance to be struck here. I think where SBTI is useful is it shows you what very ambitious looks like, and that's a good place to start looking to assess your own performance. If you can get to SBTI, definitely go to SBTI, because that's where we want to be if we want to reduce emissions at the rate that the planet is asking for it. However, if when we do SBTI, we find that maybe there's a raw materials problem in our scope 3 and we can't afford it. So for example, real estate, scope 3, cement and steel, we need low carbon cement and steel if we're building a lot of buildings to hit our SBTI. If it's not available and we can't afford it, we've got a problem there. So analyze that specific issue and make sure, and talk to the leadership about it. If we think we can take it on, okay, let's go for it. We can do SBTI. If not, be careful. I think the other thing to bear in mind about SBTI is if you can't hit your targets, not the end of the world, right? We're anticipating a lot of companies are going to fall short, but the real question is, are you making a serious effort to? In other words, is SBTI driving innovation that brings value to your business? So maybe you couldn't quite get enough low carbon steel to hit SBTI, but you got your emissions down anyway. That's still going to be received positively by investors, for example, or other target audiences. So it's not like SBTI is a total pass fail. And there may be market conditions in the end that make it impossible to achieve SBTI, like raw materials pricing, for example, or ability to engage suppliers. But really the core question is, can you have a serious go at it, right? Are you willing to invest into the areas that are your primary drivers of emissions reductions or not? Only derive a target from where you are prepared to have a serious go at something.
Wonderful. So I'm kind of getting that. Don't set a target too high that you will miss it in the end, because that is counterproductive. And Q, you also mentioned that word counterproductive. If, for example, Fraser's Property Singapore did not align its decarbonization roadmap with the Singapore government targets and sustainability targets as well. Could you please expand on that a little bit? Was it ambitious enough, or was it just ambitious and aligned with the business practicality as well?
Okay, thanks, Bing, for the questions. I believe that setting an ambitious target but yet achievable targets is important, very important. It must be ambitious and it must be able to achieve at the same time. So our approach is to set these targets that's challenging but must be realistic, with a clear roadmap, with initiative being planned with the next few years. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but we will need to really understand what is the current policies, requirements, and what's the technologies available now. So we plan with all this ahead of us, and we implement it in stages, so that we can have a clear roadmap for the continuous improvement. Yeah, so definitely that there will be some shortfall, as what Liam has shared just now. But that will be actually, with the advancement of technology, we can actually look at how future technology can reduce the shortfall. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Q. And Tirpan, what's the minimum data that companies and maybe SMEs could prepare just to be able to start estimating their emissions credibly?
Yeah, so as I mentioned already, so the key areas would be around your energy, your fuel and electricity consumption. I think that's the bare minimum. If you calculate both of those areas, I think in most companies, in most sectors, you would already be covering around 90% of emissions. And as Liam mentioned already, that's a good start because you don't necessarily need to set targets on 100% of your emissions. You can set the targets on what you've already calculated emissions for. And maybe a little bit off topic from what you've mentioned, I think there's also maybe like another trick, or especially if you're not setting a science-based target. So if you're not aware, under science-based targets, they do allow intensity targets. However, the caveat is that those intensity targets must also translate to absolute emissions reductions. We've found with a lot of our clients that it's whenever we pose the question about absolute emissions reductions, it's pretty challenging. So do also consider setting an intensity target. It may still allow for growth of your company, but at the same time, you have a target in place that would help to improve the efficiency. Another quick thing that I wanted to talk about is about financials. So a lot of our clients, they will come back to the bottom line. So maybe not starting with like the trajectory, what the world requires in terms of reductions, which is SBTI, but looking at what we will invest, what cost reductions we are able to achieve, and from that, then stating a target that we are willing to invest X amount. This X amount will lead to X amount of reductions. So looking at more from a bottom up, it may not please all of the stakeholders, but it's a good start in being practical.
Thanks, Tirpan, for mentioning that. It leads nicely to my question to Q. Q, if you could disclose within this session, what was the budget that Fraser's Property Singapore set aside to support the resources you need to set your first climate target?
Okay, basically for the first climate targets, we engaged a consultant, I shared just now, PwC, and we have also spent, under the group, invest on this centralized data management. Other than this, it's just our internal resources. But this is just a starting. The more high capex resources budget will need to come after the setting and also implementations of the various initiatives to achieve the reductions.
Thank you so much, Q. And Liam, coming to you, of course, the narrative towards decarbonization and corporate climate action would come from many perspectives, and one of which is, responding to what the planet needs. You said it very well when you say that if it was just up to us responding to the planetary crisis, then the ambition should be way up there. But what advice would you give companies that are trying to achieve the balance between setting credible emissions targets and also making it real?
Yeah, and this is a really, really key question, and I think it's so I think it's very much about there's a tension here, right? Is that if we just do business as usual, in other words, we just do carbon reductions that are affordable under our current business model, we've got a real problem because we're not going to be reducing emissions very quickly, right? If we put science-based target level of ambition as our as our goal for everybody, for a lot of companies, that will be too much too fast. So we've got to find something in the middle here, right? I think what we've done is we often get the SBTI framework and we put it in front of the customer and say, okay, look, if we can get to this, that's great. But if you can't, let's do a credible, step towards this with the idea that later on we can kind of go and get to this later. right? So you keep the SBTI context, but you don't necessarily go there as your first step. But we've also found that using SBTI can increase level of ambition within a company because they want it, right? So I want that. I want to be seen as that, so I'll invest more, and I'll take I'll take more risk because I want that than I would have done under business. So you can leverage SBTI and other market standards to generate more level of ambition within the business. So use it. I would say use it to get the most out of the company. One thing we see quite a lot of is the scope 3 piece is a lot harder than the scope 1 and 2 piece. I think for Asian businesses now, scope 1 and 2 is actually pretty doable across the board, even at the SBTI level of ambition, because we've got more renewables procurement opportunities and because there's still a lot of energy efficiency opportunities in our building stock and our manufacturing stock. So maybe break scope 1 and 2 off first, put a target around that, get moving and get successful, and then you pull the scope 3 piece in as a second step that you can use to bring you up to SBTI level of ambition. That might be a way to chop the process up.
Thank you, Liam. Very enlightening. I'll come back to Tirapon. So we have the likes of Q representing Fraser's Property Singapore, which is obviously a big company. But Tirapon, there are those that are probably doing this for the first time and in-house. What's your advice for them?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned already, so in terms of greenhouse gas accounting, definitely there are, and as I mentioned, 14 years ago, starting at EM as a junior consultant, I gone through the process. It's not impossible. It's possible, but it might be time consuming, and then there's always the concerns about getting it right, which could be helped, like I mentioned, by consultants, and then of course third-party verification is important. So, but starting off, like I've mentioned, there's the tools for greenhouse gas inventory. The SBTI tools themselves, they are relatively straightforward, and they will help you. I mean, like Liam said, you could look to SBTI as the start, and then at least follow the same steps in terms of the recommendations and the requirements for SBTI. But the main part that you would stop is the ambition. So the ambition is about 4.2% reduction per year. You can look to scale that back. I think previously SBTI had something like 2.5% per year. So 1.5 is more aligned, 4.2% is more aligned with 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a net zero of around 2050. But if you scale back that ambition to like something like 2.5% per year, that would get you roughly net zero by 2060, which would be roughly, below 2 degrees Celsius or around 2 degrees Celsius. So I think that's a good start, and the SBTI tools are readily available. I think they might be a bit difficult to tweak, but you can get an idea of what you need in terms of looking at the target trajectory, at least from the top down. But I think looking at your from a bottom up approach, I think that would be a bit more challenging. You would need to have lots of data in terms of all of the projects that you're doing in terms of emissions reductions, whether you intended it or not. They might be intended more towards energy savings and that sort of thing. But that bottom up data is also very useful in starting to see your business as usual, basically, in terms of your existing projects. And as we've all been talking about, how to get to the next step, which is something more ambitious, would require more investment. Is the management willing to do that? Is there enough incentive or cost savings regarding the projects to enable that?
Thanks so much, Tirapon. You've just become the human calculator for ESG emissions to net zero here. Thank you very much for that. Coming from the, just from off the fly there. I really appreciate the sharing here, but I'm also conscious of the time. So once again, I'd like to thank you, Liam, Q, and Tirapon for coming to join the CDX webinar this month with your pragmatic and practical insights that really drive home the conversation around the practicality of setting your first climate target, and I guess the business case for doing so. So to bring this session to a close, I'd like to also call now the CDX CEO, Mr. Mark Lister, to share his concluding remarks and some recap of key insights from the session. Thank you so much, Mark.
Great, thank you, Ping, and yeah, look, thank you so much to all of you, Liam, Q, and Tirupon, for your insights into this topic on how to set climate targets. And as you all know, there's a lot of noise and a lot of conversation about this question of corporate decarbonisation, and what we're trying to do with the Southeast Asia Corporate Decarbonisation Exchange, implementing and financing the kind of solutions that will be needed, and then sharing your impact effectively and credibly. So we'd encourage you to stay engaged. I think we've achieved the objectives of making it more practical, really found the insights that these expert providers have given us today really valuable and helpful. So really, thanks for those inputs that you've given us. And I hope that it's also usable for you. So if not, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what it is that you need and the questions that you need answered, so that you can start to take action and we'll try and keep it practical in that way. So I'd encourage you to stay engaged with what we're doing at CDX, get involved, get informed. You can meet some more experts and get the answers that you need to take action. So we'll be here as a presence, and I think Ping can tell you a little bit about more of our events coming up in person and online. So thanks again for your attendance today.
Thanks for the cue, Mark. And do catch CDX in the Philippines on September 18. We will be co-delivering with the Net Zero Carbon Alliance, the Philippine Net Zero Conference. And we'll also be doing the CDX Summit 2025 in Bangkok, alongside the inaugural Bangkok Climate Action Week. And to be able to follow CDX and to stay engaged, please do see the screen that will be flashed right now to connect with us. So once again, thank you so much, Liam, Q, and Tirupon, and Mark, and to all of you who invested 45 minutes of your time today, a little over, but we do hope that it has been productive. See you again in the next CDX webinar in August.
Thank you. Thanks, Ping.
Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.